Evening all from yours truly, Rubber, and Sweep the Cat, who no doubt her and her sister Sooty will be traversing across my camera at various points because that's what they do. We've been away in Italy for a week and we came back and they're just really soppy, very over affectionate. They're quite unusual for cats in that regard, that they like human company. Anyway, let's get on with analysing what's been going on in the news this week. So we start with Brexit, and things have gone nuclear on that. So on the one hand, we have the current government, Boris Johnson PM, purging the parliamentary party of so-called wets. I'll go beyond that. They're not just wets. That these are people who are essentially EU federalists. I mean, some of them haven't gone as far as openly declaring themselves to be federalists, but if you have a look at their stances on various issues over the years, and what they've said and what they've done, it's clear that these people have put the EU ahead of all things. EU fetishists. And chief among these is Ken Clarke. Now, people say, oh, well, Ken Clarke, you can't take the whip away from Ken Clarke. He was a former Chancellor, a former Cabinet Minister under Thatcher and Major. All this is true. That's a long time ago. It's over 20 years since he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Let's not forget that. And even though he had some success as Chancellor, these are different times. He did want us to adopt the euro as our currency. He has always been a federalist. He rarely uses the word federalism. His phrase whenever federalism is mentioned, I noticed this when he was on television in recent years debating with Jacob Rees-Mogg or Douglas Murray on this. He goes, oh, but what is sovereignty anyway? We pull sovereignty in so many areas. And this is just his roundabout way of saying he's a European federalist. And most of the others are of that ilk. Now, I don't really have a lot of love for these 21 MPs. I've been hugely critical of them over the years. Some of them I gave the benefit of the doubt when they first became members of Parliament and started rising to prominence, like Justine Greening. I gave her the benefit of the doubt at the time, but she has shown herself to be very much allied with progressive left-wing thought. She was... I think she wanted to promote kind of transgender equality, kind of having something equivalent to the Canadian C-16 bill introduced in this country. That is a very progressive left-wing thought. She was also named in Caroline Lucas's all-female emergency cabinet. So Greening is far too much into the progressive left camp, as lots of others. Rory Stewart, Amber Rudd has connections with the Labour Party. Rory Stewart, only by his own admission, only joined the Conservative Party because he thought it was a party that got things done, not because he is intrinsically a Conservative or he's particularly mainstream right-wing or even centre-right. And if you have a look at these 21 MPs, most of them have come from a kind of Blairite tradition. That's the kind of politics that he envisaged, the kind of third way, slightly left-leaning, but still in favour of big corporations. This is explains Ken Clarke and Michael Heseltine's political careers. People say, how did Heseltine ever get into the Conservative Party and rise to such prominence if he has all these very progressive and big state ideas? Well, that's because for Clarke and Heseltine, these are corporatists, right? The bigger the business, the better it is in there. But they don't support entrepreneurs. They don't support kind of the notions of freedom and individual property rights as we understand them. They love to see the mergers between big business and government. So this is where they're coming from. I think I've mentioned this on previous episodes of The Biscuit. This is kind of where they're coming from. So they wouldn't necessarily find a natural home in the Labour Party, particularly the Labour Party of the 60s and 70s, which is where they would have been young men just entering into the political sphere. They wouldn't have gone with anything as markedly socialist as the Labour Party of the 60s and 70s, nor with the Liberals. You know, if you want to make a huge amount of profit, but within the guise of being on the boards of big business, you would go with the Conservative Party, even though you didn't have a lot of conservative ideas, particularly in social policy or particularly in individual liberty, entrepreneurship, and kind of the deregulation of small business to try and promote a kind of entrepreneur class. So that explains them. So I think it's only right and proper that we have political parties in this country. I think Blairism in the third way ruined politics in this country because what we had was a Labour Party that shifted itself towards the centre, certainly economically, if not socially. I will maintain that the Blair government was very left-wing in terms of social policy. It's just that they didn't nationalise everything, and they were big into the kind of, again, big business and government working together. So because of that, they've been falsely assumed. The Blairite Labour Party was assumed to be no different from the Conservative Party. That's not true. Blairism moved to the centre. It occupied the ground held by the Liberal Democrats. And I think the Liberal Democrats did a bad thing when they merged with the SDP, because I think classical liberalism, which is what the Liberal Party was once in favour of, came in and merged with social democracy. And I think even though in terms of numbers, the Liberals had more than the SDP, but I think SDP ideology subsumed the Liberal Party of classical liberalism and made it a left-wing social democrat party, but with some nods towards private enterprise, again, in the guise of big business. So what happens is then that started infecting parts of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party were electorally in trouble, and they did have to modernise and kind of liberalise to win power again. But it was a mistake to think that just being a bit more liberal, to being more accommodating and tolerant towards different lifestyles, particularly when it came to same-sex relationships, liberalising there meant that they had to go into the whole progressive left ideology. We now have a lot of gays in the Conservative Party who are quite based and dry when it comes to politics. So the Conservative Party needed to liberalise and make itself more appealing, but they made the mistake in thinking, well, to make ourselves more appealing, let's jump into this kind of centre-left progressive territory, and that will get us votes, because it's ultimately cost them. I think the public are far more small c conservative than a lot of pundits and people in the political establishment think. They believe everybody's kind of deep down a progressive leftist. That's not true. I think a lot of people, they value the nuclear family, they value individual liberty, and they value their right to own their own labour and own their own property. And I think this is a massive misreading by the left-leaning elites. And so that's what happened, was that the Conservative Party morphed into something it should never have been. Likewise, the Labour Party morphed into something it should never have been. I think it's good. It's going to sound odd me saying this, but I think it's good that Labour have tacked more to the left. I think it's gone too far left, but let's say Ed Miliband, the Ed Miliband style of leftism, or Andy Burnham style of leftism, that's comfortable Labour territory. I mean, yeah, and you can reject it at the ballot box. But it's an identity. It's an identity, and the Conservative Party should be more conservative, more in favour of individual liberty, more in favour of free markets, stuff like that. It's absolutely fine. It should go back to being that, and then lead the third way for the Liberal Democrats. In fact, I think the Liberal Democrats should split into an SDP and Liberal Party once again, and just like, okay, we have more options, we have more range here, and everybody is in a political party that shares their ideology. The trouble with the likes of Roy Stewart and Amber Rudd is that they're trying to take a mainstream right-wing political party and drag it forcefully into the centre-left, and they use words like moderate. There is nothing moderate about Blairism, right? Blairism was not moderate. If you have a government that thinks it's okay for local Labour-led councils to order people to take down Union flags on their own private property because it's seen as racist, you are not moderate. Okay, you have to look at the education curriculum that Blairism, which was full of revisionist Marxist history. That is not moderate. Okay, so this whole idea that these 21 Conservative MPs represent anything moderate is not true. Ken Clarke is now saying he will support an actively Marxist government as long as it keeps us in the European Union. That is not a moderate position. And if you're prepared to say you want a Marxist as your prime minister just so you can stay in the European Union, you ain't no Conservative, bruv. Get out. The Labour Party's over there, the Liberal Democrats are over there. Make your pick, Clarke. One of those two. Which is it? So goodbye. But you think that was the end of it? No, of course, because we can't now get anything done. We can't get a no deal done because every trick in the book is being used by Remainers in a sort of desperate thrashing attempt. We have this ultra partisan Speaker of the House of Commons, and now the Conservative Party have got to go back on an agreement that they've had for a couple of decades, which is that nobody puts up a candidate to stand against the Speaker of the House whilst the Speaker of the House. No, we have to put a Conservative Party candidate up against John Bercow to get him out because he is absolutely ruining the office of Speaker of the House of Commons. And Remainers then say, right, we've found some kind of pretext where we could actually arrest Boris Johnson. We could arrest the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom if he goes for a no-deal Brexit because we stuck in some kind of Stephen Kinnock law saying he can't do that. I mean, this is the thrashings of Remainers, sort of bringing everything down. And at first I'm thinking, why would they want to do this? Why would they want to, ruin the office of the Speaker of the House of Commons? Why would they muck about with parliamentary democracy? Why would they put a Prime Minister in jail over a technicality? Why are they destroying, the voter trust? Why are they doing this? They keep saying that they believe in all this parliamentary tradition and our parliamentary democracy, and they do the opposite. And then I thought, no, it's not the Westminster parliamentary tradition that they want to uphold. It's the European parliamentary tradition. These people, if they're federalists and they don't care about the traditions, the history and the structure and the constitution of this country because they've got something that they much prefer waiting in the wings, waiting to take over. This is me just keeping the cat's tail out of the camera. So the thing is, they don't care if our system burns. They just won't care. But they're too stupid to think through the consequences. They honestly believe, and reading the Twitter feeds of some of these great and good, and all these blue check marks, and all these lecturers and media personalities, they honestly think they can reverse Brexit. They can imprison the Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who is enjoying a lot of popularity. The polling data on shows that the Conservative Party have gone up with voters' intentions, that they're enjoying support. If a general election was run, the Conservative Party was most likely win majority. So what they do, and they're even denying a general election. People was going, okay, let's get a general election as long as we get things done. They're denying that. They're saying that Boris Johnson is trying to lead a coup, and at the same time, he's called for a general election. He said, let's have a general election then. And they're preventing it. Who's running the coup? But the thing is that they think all this will happen. They could reverse Brexit, keep us in the EU, and nobody, none of these 21, none of these pro-Remain MPs are saying, okay, if we remain in the EU. Don't worry. We're not going to have we're not going to join the single currency. We're going to stay out of this European army project. We're going to have red lines and say no more exchanging sovereignty, and we'll work on something to curb immigration. None of them are saying that. They're saying we remain in the EU and we swallow everything that the EU gives us. So they think they can do this, and they think they can lock the Prime Minister up on a technicality, and there will be no consequences. That the voters will just go, God, jolly gee, well, we better let these experts run everything after all, I suppose. No, there will be huge, dire consequences if Brexit is frustrated again, especially over technicalities, and especially in a way that does not meet the public's approval. Okay, so what I shudder to think where it's going to end. If a scenario is where the Prime Minister is imprisoned and charged, and an emergency cabinet led by Corbyn or led by Joe Swinson or Caroline Lucas or whatever does take charge, and then people protest, and then the police and the army are deployed to suppress pro-Brexit rallies and demonstrations. I mean, anything is possible now, and I'm genuinely scared. Let's lighten the mood here by talking about The Sims. So, my online colleague, not so obvious Mark, really doesn't like my taste in computer games. I mean, we both agree. We both like Minecraft. Okay, but who doesn't? But when it comes to the kind of games I like, I like playing Fortnite. Because I'm not that good at kind of shoot 'em up games. But reflexes aren't what they were when I was 21 and playing Duke Nukem and the original Apple II version of Castle Wolfenstein. It's life has moved on. I need something a little bit more relaxing, something a bit more escapist, and so I occasionally play Fortnite, but I do like The Sims 4, and he hates The Sims. Why would you want to play a game where you run people's lives, get them jobs, decorate their houses? I go, precisely, because it's a way of switching off, and a lot of fun can be had with The Sims 4. As I've discovered, I don't play the game as the designers intended. I create, it's kind of like little soap operas with them. So I have a standard game where I follow a few characters around, try and get them married, get them promoted at work, try and make a fortune, live in an expensive house. But I've created a couple of other kind of offbeat ones. I've created a dystopian soy boy world. It's a matriarchy where the women are in charge. And it's just like I can war game out kind of scenarios in The Sims 4 about how soy boy world would work. So I've got these guys with big horn rimmed glasses and beards going, "That's problematic." I give them really high pitched voices. Oh, sorry. Anyway, what's this all got to do with what's been happening in the week? Well, The Sims 4 has done something that has divided the fans. See, this week there was a patch. There was an update patch on the game, and my game updated. And I kind of was looking around at some of the new stuff, and I was looking at the building. So, you can have stairs that go around corners now. You can staircases and new types of fencing and stuff for the outdoors. That was all good. But then in the clothing section, they put in hijabs, burqas, and And I had a look at the official website. Hello, what's going on here? And it turns out that the designers at EA Games were going, there's a lot of Muslims who play The Sims, but they don't feel like they are properly represented. Their fashion choices are just not there. With hijabs and headscarves and the hats that the men wear and the kind of the long woolen shirt that the men wear. And so they decided to put in some Muslim-inspired clothing, including burqas, hijabs, and the burkini, the the approved body covering swimsuit. So that's been put in the game, and on the forums, the Sims fans were very divided over this, for praising the inclusivity of the game, and others were saying religion has no place in The Sims 4, and up until now it hasn't had a place. I mean, if it's hard to say what Christian inspired clothing is, apart from you can't get necklaces with a cross on them, which is the most overt thing that you see most Christians wear to display their faith. But there's no kippah for, say, if you had a Jewish character in The Sims. But now you can get hijabs and burqas. So people were saying, well, we're going down the dark path. But then EA Games and their supporters were saying, but if you're a Muslim playing this game, you're not representative. You can't play yourself. Again, I must admit, I've not done that. I've not created a rubber for Sims 4. I think that was just too depressing. Just go and get yourself some breakfast. Click. I like my characters to be larger than life in the game, not sort of kind of mundane and realistic. So there's that, and of course me with my feelings on politics and diversity and inclusion, just sat back and didn't wade into this debate. And people saying, "Oh, this is terrible. This content shouldn't be here." And eventually, I did weigh in. And I said, "There's nothing stopping you from just deleting that from your game. You don't have to have It's just a clothing option. If you don't want any Muslims in your game, if you don't want people to wear hijabs and burqas, you don't have to. That's the whole thing about a game like The Sims 4. There's all these people on the left trying to virtue signal, sort of very vocal secularists and people who want diversity and inclusion, all saying this is right for the game, this isn't right for the game. But at the end of the day, it's just an outfit in the game, and you don't have to use it. And if the game randomly creates Muslim characters in the gear and you don't think it's fitting, you just get rid of that. Get rid of that sim. You don't have to use this stuff. This is ultimate consumer choice. But unfortunately, because they're not based enough, these fans, they don't understand that choice is a thing. Now, if the game then started putting in things like, your Muslim character, they've put in a mechanism to pray, or they put in a mechanism that promotes this at the expense, and you can't go secular with your characters, or you can't have this, or you can't have that, and the game is forcing you into making these kind of virtue signaling choices, then I think we've got a problem. But at the moment, just outfits. Nothing, don't use them. It's that simple. But it is funny how these things can even get into the world of Sims 4, when virtue signaling backfires. So we better talk a little bit about Robert Mugabe. So he's dead at the age of 95, finally. A couple of years after he was kind of ousted from being president. Now, there hasn't been as much coverage as I thought there would be. He's one of the last out-and-out dictators of the world, particularly of a particular generation. This is going back a few decades. He became leader of Zimbabwe when the Cold War was still a thing. And I was hoping for a little bit more analysis and dissection of his time as president of Zimbabwe from the mainstream media. We just didn't get it, really. In fact, the BBC was weird. Even The Guardian kind of admitted, he was a tyrant and a dictator and oppressed people. Even The Guardian had to admit that in the end. But the BBC just had all these people kind of making weak apologies for Robert Mugabe. It was just like, he had started with good intentions, and the education system. Isn't it funny, isn't it, when the left praises murderous dictators, they always go, but they improved education. Education won't do much if you haven't got any freedom, or you're dead, or your family are dead. But I'm old enough to remember when he took power. I was still at school, still in primary school when that happened. But I remember because for my parents' generation, they were talking a lot about Ian Smith. Some of my parents' friends liked Ian Smith, and others hated him, and so we always had these debates going on in the house when I was growing up, and I would kind of listen from afar. So when Mugabe at first was the prime minister. The original president was Joshua Nkomo, because Mugabe was seen as, no, he is too Marxist, too left wing, and he owed a lot of his rise to power through violent means. So Joshua Nkomo was supposed to be the moderate one, the one that would calm Mugabe down, and the country was going to be called Zimbabwe Rhodesia. It was going to have the double-barreled name. Anyway, Zimbabwe Rhodesia, that didn't last long, and neither did Joshua Nkomo. So he's kind of pushed aside. Mugabe became a total tyrant. And then we had a thing that the left really played down, but it was hard to ignore, and that was the rise of the war veteran group. This was over a decade, 15 years after the civil war in Rhodesia. And what happens is that they were demanding land rights, and of course, just Mugabe's government was just telling the war veterans they could just march onto any white-owned land and take it, and people were killed, people were murdered, and it was an atrocity and unlawful, but it happened. And so you were left with a properly educated and skilled group of people, the educated whites in Zimbabwe, being purged from that country. And Mugabe was very open about it, and not a lot was done from the West. Peter Tatchell tried to make a citizen's arrest of Mugabe. Zimbabwe was kicked out of the Commonwealth. There were the cricket protests from likes of Andy Flower and Henry Alonga, the Zimbabwean cricketers who risked their lives, and they could never return to Zimbabwe with Mugabe still in power, because they protested against his policies. And you had a white flight from there. So much for a kind of government of unity, of bringing people together and moving on in a kind of non-racial future. His policies were Marxist, and they were racist and murderous. And I just think we should all bear this in mind when we think about Robert Mugabe. I don't give a shit about how good he was for the education of the country. There was too much blood on the hand, and he ruined the country. And what good was having all these educated people when the country was starving and absolutely bankrupt? His legacy is one of shame and horror, and I make no bones about that. Anyway, I don't know what next week's going to bring. So let's dive into. You said I've got 3 different types of biscuits in this tin, so I'm just going to take a random one, and it is Chubby Heart. Yay! Okay, until next week, keep it clean.